researching Darwin and Foucault and Hannah Arendt and stuff. So I really am a little dazed. But I started something. This is, I'm reading from two pieces. I started something, and it's funny that Brenda's here because she's the little voice always saying, "Tonya, where's your work?" Which I love her for. So I'll just read from this piece, which is an essay that keeps evolving into whatever it's evolving into. It's called The Mathematics of Chaos. Pay attention to where you at. The St. Nicholas Terrace incline between 129th and 125th Streets in Harlem is steep. So steep, in fact, that when I first moved here, I felt slightly courageous, imagining the muscles my legs would develop. I imagined doing a Tina Turner turn without her bruises, all shapely and strong. Of course, without bruises, strength and beauty are impossible, only theoretical. My heart, I imagined becoming stronger, burlier. It was winter, but had not yet snowed, and I couldn't stop thinking about what the hill would be like in winter. White and quieter against a cloudy sky, treacherous. Geography can be transformative. The way a bullet to the body can be transformed from just damaging metal by the stage or the screen or the music video into the hero's talisman. I could already see that I would be physically altered by this entirely new landscape. Any physical change aside, and what are the other changes? In the body brings a correspondent rhythmical change in stride and speech, and in the nature of what the altered body makes. I moved to the top of this hill in Harlem, the southern border of which is slowly being moved further and further north from the bottom of the usually steep hill in Jersey City, and to Jersey City, another city of immigrants from a few years in the flat land of Houston, Texas, and from a childhood and adolescence in low-lying Delta lands. Although I wasn't born there, my relatives on occasion taught me with Yankee, though of course I have never and would never taunt them with Confederates. Home is Nolans, that dike-enclosed fabrication caught among the Mississippi River, the Gulf of Mexico, and Lake Pontchartrain, the three tongues which dictate the wills and ways of the city. 6 feet below the high water levels of the river and the lake, the flat crescent city, the only hills where man-made necessities, is under constant threat of deluge. As a child, that possibility of deluge was a source of excitement. My 3 younger sisters and I often hoped for rain enough to close schools, but not businesses, for rain enough to elicit a stay home today from my mother, who worried about keeping us well and dry. Rain caps, umbrellas, fans, handkerchiefs, hairspray, and antiperspirants were a must for any young woman over age 10. Still, despite being armed against and warned about what the rain or the humidity would do to our relaxed hair, until May 3rd, 1978, my sisters and I understood floods and storms as a means to freedom and decadence. On that morning, we awoke to the same sounds of rain that had lulled us to sleep. The television weathermen with cartoon-colored maps and dramatic vocal emphasis talked about the unexpected storm. My mother, as she dressed for work and maximum dryness, told us that we should stay home. She called often on the Ma Bell connection to check on us and to make sure that we were taking care of the business of being home alone, which meant keeping the curtains drawn and the doors locked so that no one outside knew we were there. Sometime just before noon, my youngest sister Brianna pulled aside a curtain and peeked out of the living room window. "There's water everywhere," she said. Wow, and sound everywhere, too. In fewer than 24 hours, enough rain had fallen to flood the city. The water smashed through the display windows and lobster tanks of Tipitina's restaurant, which was not too far from us. Friends who had gone to school that morning talked of walking next to lobsters on the neutral grounds. I remember feeling disappointed about having missed the action, and surprised by what water could do of its own accord, without us even noticing we had been surrounded. Water like language, like water like language, like water like language, like otters like language, like daughters like otters, like licking, like lapping, like language waters. On August 29th, I had returned to my Harlem apartment from 3 weeks of teaching. I returned to an apartment where I had had my cable disconnected because I wanted to sustain the cold turkey withdrawal from TV buzz, recalibrate my alpha brainwave patterns, reclaim the indeterminacy and non-narrativity of 30 minutes, reconnect with the less mediated now. But the disaster ruins everything, all the while leaving the idea of everything intact. I canceled my plans to cancel the cable because the storm was barreling down on home, the home where I no longer lived, where I hadn't lived in years, the home to which future I in old age planned to return for good, the home I returned to several times a year saying to friends, I'm flying home. Home. The place where a person, family, or household lives. Home. A family or any other group that lives together or recollects living together or imagines someday living again together or buries its dead together. Home. Where somebody was born or raised or feel he or she belongs. Home. The place where something is most common or indigenous, or where something had its origins, although origins have their own origins, each source its myriad sources. A place where a person or animal can find refuge and safety or live in security. For several years, New Orleans was the murder capital of the country. Then it was D.C. Now I'm not sure. Home, an establishment where somebody who is in need of care, rest, or medical attention can stay or find help. Home, the place where somebody is imagined to dwell after death. Literary, because of water, Cousin Bootsy was buried a 6-hour drive from a home she never left. Home, the place or point that must be hit in order to score in many games, or that must be reached in order to be safe from attack, except by natural forces as landscaped. See home plate. Home, at or to the house, household, or country where somebody lives and believes they, believes they once lived. Home, to the point or desired goal. Home, to the center or heart of something, or as far as possible into a desired position. And there is always a counter-desire. Home, to go back to the house, household, or country where somebody lives. Home, to return home, especially to fly home. Home, to have a home and live in it, dated. Home, to take or send somebody or something home, dated. To give a home to somebody or something, dated. The disaster has no single origin, no single moment of birth. Like the wave bruising the shore, it is an unapologetic accretion of uninterrupted motion. Len Shaw writes, there is no reaching the disaster. Homing in on what was happening to the hominess of home required cable, CNN, internet. I had to see what I couldn't ask because all the cellular circuits to my mother were busy, because we couldn't find my father, because all the cellular circuits to my sister were busy, because all the cellular circuits to 411 were busy, because all the cellular circuits to Ernest, Willie, Frank, Sterling, Carolyn, Rogers, Della, Dorothy, Gwen were busy, because all the circular circuits to my cousins, although that's not busy, because all the cellular circuits to my cousins, Yolanda, Kathy, Michelle, Barbara, Burnell, Kieta, Amber, Bootsy, Karen, Terrence, Gwen, Jackie were busy. Scratch Gwen, she had already died. Because Aunt Renee was in a nursing home and my cousin Karen and her mother were in the city. Because all I knew of blood and kin and step-kin and less were busy. Because all I knew of reaching was insomnia and inundation. Because all I could know was dependent on cables and cords and electronic connections and was collated in the images and voices coming out of a 19-inch box. Because of the passivity that distance manufactures, and each image is a calculation construction of distance between I and them. I begin a letter to Oprah, who is everywhere, who is the image of everywhere. Dear O, Hurricane Katrina bears down on the coast, down on the place I call home, and perhaps that's what makes procrastination impossible at the moment. I am well aware of the possibilities, aware of what water and wind can do, aware of the threat that has been held at bay by prayer, by voodoo, by Gulf Streams, by damn luck. I have over the past year and a half been planning to write to you, and now the water is rising. And this woman who worked so hard all her life and has so little material comfort stands to lose everything. There's so little rest for the weary. I had planned on writing to you about her because of a daughter's obvious love and affection for her mother, and because of what I can't do. And what does can't contain? Cordon off. Containment was always one of my hometown's central concerns. Some of the dead, to keep them drawn from contaminating the living, are buried above ground in stone crypts that one as an almost native, without seeming to notice, walks easily among. Those buried under the wet dirt were put there with the knowledge that water rises. I wonder what happened to so many of our dead. It's such a complicated matter, the attempt to contain the thing that defines you. In the Big Easy, a name suggested by the general attitude of the city's inhabitants and by the ease with which many musicians could find gigs, an elaborate system of interconnected man-made levees stretch along the river and lakefront, across the swamps and along the waterways. Canals and pumping stations like veins and hearts move the water through. So although New Orleans was built because of its proximity to the Mississippi River, the city's survival and growth had always been dependent on containing and on protecting itself against the very thing that called it into being. Process of construction and resistance. The city is by no means, this idea of containment is essential to the broad cultural function of New Orleans in pre, during, and post-Katrina America. Referred to as Ile d'Orléans by early French settlers, the geographic description works as a visual analog for how the site of New Orleans exists, operates for the non-native in relation to many other U.S. cultural spaces. For many, New Orleans has long been a social fantasy, embodied in tourist bubbles, historical districts, entertainment precincts, malls, and other variations on theme parks that are partitioned off from the rest of the city. It's no surprise that most tourist encounters with native inhabitants occur through inhabitants' capacities as waiters, bus and taxi drivers, bellhops, cooks, and other tourist industry professions. It's the cultural island where the adventurous tourist can go to get his/her urban safari on, but avoid the dangerous natives. Shoot if, in fear of water, they threaten to cross the border into neighboring Retton. Aside, note the double-decker bus tours which pass quickly through Harlem. I wave. Dream of running around on the corner with a spear to make the spectacle my own. However, I suspect this may not be read as respectable. The unrespectable spectacle. My mother would roundly disapprove and laugh.